Who is Cyrus Lam? The villain of Insidious. Out of the Further explained. Warning: major spoilers. Cyrus Lam, played by Sam Spruell, is the main supernatural villain of Insidious. Out of the Further. Unlike many previous Insidious demons, Cyrus isn't simply an entity that wants to torment a human. He was a cult leader obsessed with defeating death, and after becoming trapped in the Further, he discovers that Gemma's unique ability could give him a way back into the real world. So, who exactly is Cyrus Lam, and why is he so interested in Gemma and her daughter Maya? Cyrus is one of the biggest additions to the Insidious mythology in Out of the Further. The franchise has previously given us terrifying entities such as the Lipstick Face Demon, the Bride in Black, and Keyface. But Cyrus is different. He's not simply a monster hiding in the Further. He was once a human being, and his obsession with death began while he was alive. That obsession eventually transformed him into something much more dangerous. Who was Cyrus Lam before he died? Cyrus was a cult leader who became obsessed with the idea that death wasn't actually the end. He convinced his followers that there was another existence beyond death and that humans could somehow overcome the boundary between life and death. But Cyrus didn't just want to talk about the afterlife. He wanted to experience it himself. His obsession eventually led him to take his own life as part of an attempt to prove that death could be defeated. Instead of finding the freedom he expected, Cyrus became trapped in the Further. And that is where his real plan begins. The Further isn't heaven or hell. It's a supernatural realm inhabited by lost souls and dangerous entities. For Cyrus, however, it becomes a prison. He discovers that he can see the world of the living, but he can't simply return whenever he wants. So, he starts looking for another way out. Why is Cyrus so dangerous? Cyrus isn't dangerous simply because he's powerful. He's dangerous because he understands how the Further works. He knows that the barrier between the living world and the Further can sometimes be crossed. And he understands that certain people have abilities that make that crossing easier. That's where Gemma enters the story. Sony's official synopsis describes Gemma as someone who can enter the Further but also do something far more unusual: bring things from the Further back into the real world. For Cyrus, that's exactly the ability he's been waiting for. Why does Cyrus need Gemma? Gemma is essentially a living bridge between two worlds. Most people who enter the Further need to project themselves into that realm. Gemma's ability works differently. She can move objects and eventually supernatural entities between the Further and the physical world. That changes everything. Cyrus has spent years trapped on the other side. He wants freedom. He wants to cross into the physical world permanently. And Gemma gives him a possible route. That's why Cyrus isn't simply trying to kill her. He needs her. More specifically, he needs to manipulate her supernatural ability. What does Cyrus want with Maya? Maya is Gemma's daughter, and she becomes increasingly important because the supernatural ability appears to be connected to Gemma's family. Gemma's mother, Ingrid, had a similar connection to the Further. Now Gemma has inherited it, and Maya appears to be part of the same supernatural lineage. That means Cyrus has potentially found another generation of couriers. His interest in Maya isn't simply because she's vulnerable. She represents another possible connection between the Further and the real world, and Cyrus is willing to exploit that connection to achieve his goal. What are the acolytes? Cyrus doesn't operate completely alone. He has followers known as the acolytes. These figures are connected to his larger plan and help protect the supernatural gateway between the two worlds. Their ability to induce sleep is particularly important because entering the Further requires a connection between consciousness and the supernatural realm. The acolytes therefore become part of Cyrus' attempt to manipulate the boundary. They're essentially his agents. While Cyrus controls the larger plan, they help create the conditions he needs to execute it. Why does Cyrus want to escape the Further? The answer goes back to his obsession with death. Cyrus spent his life believing that death could be conquered. But after dying, he discovers that existence in the Further isn't the freedom he imagined. He's still trapped. He's still limited. And he's still unable to return to the world of the living. That makes his motivation surprisingly simple. Cyrus wants his life back. But there's a darker side to that desire. He doesn't care how many people have to suffer. Gemma is useful to him. Maya is useful to him. His followers are useful to him. Everyone is essentially a tool. That's what makes him different from the more instinctive monsters in the franchise. Cyrus actually has a plan. Why is Cyrus different from the other Insidious villains? Previous Insidious movies have often relied on demons whose motivations are deliberately mysterious. They hunt. They possess. They frighten. But Cyrus has a much clearer objective. As actor Sam Spruell explained, Cyrus is a character from the further who understands the relationship between the supernatural realm and the living world. He was particularly interested in playing Cyrus as someone whose power comes from abusing control over others. That makes Cyrus feel more like a supernatural manipulator than a traditional demon. He's intelligent, he's calculating, and he understands exactly what Gemma can do. How does Cyrus manipulate Gemma? Cyrus realizes that Gemma's emotions are one of the easiest ways to control her. She is a mother. Her greatest fear isn't necessarily dying herself. It's losing Maya. Cyrus understands that. So, he uses Maya as leverage. The more Gemma tries to protect her daughter, the more deeply she becomes involved in this supernatural conflict. Cyrus essentially forces Gemma to use her own abilities against herself. He wants her to open the door. He wants her to become the mechanism that allows him and his followers to cross over. But Cyrus makes one major mistake. He underestimates Gemma. How does Gemma defeat Cyrus? The final confrontation takes place as Cyrus' plan begins to succeed. He manages to use Maya and Gemma's supernatural connection to bring himself and other entities from the further into the physical world. For a moment, it appears that Cyrus has finally accomplished what he wanted. The further is bleeding into reality. The living world is becoming his playground. But Gemma eventually realizes that her ability works in both directions. She doesn't have to keep fighting Cyrus inside the real world. She can send him back. With Elise's help, Gemma turns the entire situation around. Instead of allowing Cyrus and his followers to remain in the physical world, she uses her courier ability to transport them back into the further. And she does something even more extreme. She transports her entire house into the further. That effectively traps Cyrus and his followers on the other side. The villain's greatest advantage becomes his prison. What happens to Cyrus after he's trapped? Cyrus has promised his followers that he can give them access to the living world. But now that promise has failed. They're back where they started. And his followers aren't happy. They turn against him. Cyrus is brutally attacked and apparently torn apart by the very entities he manipulated. It's an ironic end for someone who spent his entire existence trying to escape death. He finally finds a way toward the living world, only to lose it because Gemma reverses his plan. Is Cyrus really dead? Not exactly. The movie's mid-credits scene makes his fate more complicated. Cyrus is still trapped in the further. He's shown being tormented in a horrifying dentist chair sequence involving the dead dentist. So while his physical form may have been destroyed, Cyrus himself hasn't necessarily ceased to exist. That's significant because entities in the further don't follow ordinary rules of death. And the scene leaves open the possibility that Cyrus could potentially return in a future Insidious movie. Why is the dentist scene important? It isn't just a random horror gag. Cyrus spent the entire movie manipulating other people because he believed he deserved to escape death. Now he's trapped and powerless. He's forced into the same kind of helpless position that his victims experienced. The scene therefore works as a punishment. Cyrus wanted control over life and death. Instead, he's reduced to a victim of the supernatural world he thought he understood. And the darkly comic tone of the scene gives the movie one final twist. Is Cyrus the most powerful villain in Insidious? Not necessarily, but he may be one of the most strategically dangerous. His greatest weapon isn't brute strength, it's knowledge. Cyrus understands the further. He understands Gemma's abilities. He understands how vulnerable Maya is. And he understands that the barrier between worlds is weakening. That's why he manages to get further than many previous villains. He nearly turns the entire physical world into an extension of the further. What does Cyrus represent? Cyrus represents the danger of refusing to accept death. His entire existence is built around one idea: death must be defeated. But the more he tries to escape it, the more trapped he becomes. That's an important contrast with Gemma. Gemma isn't trying to conquer death. She's trying to protect her daughter. Her power is motivated by love. Cyrus' power is motivated by obsession. And that's ultimately why she defeats him. Final answer. So, who is Cyrus Lam in Insidious? Out of the further? Cyrus Lam is the movie's primary villain, played by Spruell. He was once a cult leader obsessed with defeating death and proving that there was another existence beyond the physical world. After dying, Cyrus became trapped in the further. But instead of accepting his fate, he spent years searching for a way back. Then, he discovers Gemma. Gemma possesses an extremely rare ability that allows her to move things between the further and the real world. That makes her the perfect gateway for Cyrus. He manipulates Gemma, targets her daughter Maya, and uses his acolytes to help weaken the boundary between the two worlds. Eventually, Cyrus succeeds in bringing himself and other entities into reality. But Gemma learns how to reverse the process. With Elise's help, she sends Cyrus and his followers back into the further, and even transports her house there, trapping them on the other side. Cyrus' followers then turn against him after realizing that he has failed to deliver on his promise. And although he appears to be destroyed, the mid-credits scene reveals that he's still trapped in the further, being tormented by the dead dentist. So, Cyrus' ultimate fate is fitting. The man who spent his entire life trying to escape death never actually escapes it. Instead, he becomes trapped in the supernatural realm he believed he could control. And that's what makes Cyrus such an interesting addition to the Insidious mythology. He isn't simply a monster. He's a man whose obsession with defeating death ultimately turns him into the very thing he feared most: a prisoner of the further.